It is that time of the year again, folks. It is time to talk about the best and worst of E3. E3 2021, I think most will agree, felt a bit off, and in large part it probably had to do with the disruption that the pandemic caused, which delayed a lot of games, delayed development cycles. A lot of companies probably wanted to show more, but couldn't because the disruption just delayed aspects of development that didn't allow them to have the game in a state where they felt it was presentable, etc. So all of that is worth considering, but even with all that said, this E3 was definitely, I think, one of the least exciting ones across the board, but that's not to say that there weren't some cool announcements and reveals. There were some good things that happened here and there, but generally a lot of press conferences just felt like they didn't have enough content and surprises to justify their existence. The worst one by far is Take-Two, which wasn't really even a press conference. It was like a panel, a TED Talk about diversity in the workplace, equality and inclusion, which are important topics to talk about, just don't take up a slot at E3 and build up anticipation. It was just a woefully misplaced event across the board. That's all I'll say about that. It was literally nothing. Bandai Namco's event was a one-game showcase dedicated solely to House of Ashes, which, looks alright. It blends supernatural elements with boots-on-the-ground soldiers, but it was just mostly an interview. There was not much in the way of gameplay walkthrough, not a whole lot of substantial showcases for the game, and Bandai Namco being the publisher of Elden Ring, you would expect at least a little something about that, but nothing. Other press conferences did more for Bandai Namco than Bandai Namco did for themselves. Definitely not worth taking up an E3 slot and labeling it as a Bandai Namco event. GEARBOX, at the very least, their press conference was somewhat gaming related. There were some announcements, but for the most part, it was just a useless event. We saw the same Wonderlands trailer we saw at Summer Game Fest. Tribes of Midgard looks alright. It's a survival Viking game, but cannot carry a press conference. Homeworld 3 was announced to be in development, which is cool, but nothing was shown. An update on Godfall, which is this very tepid live service that not many people care about. It's coming to PS4 now, I guess, because not a whole lot of people are playing on PS5. And other than that, Randy Pitchford tried to tease elements of the Borderlands movie, but ultimately showed nothing. He walked around this live soundstage, talked to a few of the producers, directors, and actors, and it was just kind of really awkward vlog-style presentation, and it all ultimately closed with an awkward conversation with Kevin Hart, who looked very confused and caught off guard. And then, amidst all that, a lot of time was wasted with the Gearbox University skits, which were not funny at all to me. But yeah, overall, a complete waste of time where a lot of words were spoken, but nothing was truly said. And then we have Capcom, who I think had a very lackluster press conference all around. Definitely nowhere near enough material to justify an entire E3 slot and E3 showcase. Monster Hunter Story 2 does look cool, but we have seen that game plenty of times before. Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, I'm pumped for, but we have seen that game before. It's an old game that's now being localized, which is great to finally get that here in the States and in English. But this is the game that they spent the most time showing gameplay for, and this is a visual novel that we've already seen just with text that's in a different language. Monster Hunter Rise got a few updates, which is nice. Love that game, but nothing mind-blowing, and this is a game that's already out. Resident Evil 8, they announced a new DLC, but the announcement was all we got. They showed nothing new, and then the show ended on frickin' esports, which I thought was baffling. So Capcom's showcase was definitely among the weaker ones. So the ones that I've listed here are what I'd consider the low tier of press conferences for this specific range of showcases. Now we're going to move on to the mid-tier stuff, starting with PC Gaming Show. So there were too many games for me to list out here, but it was basically mostly an indie showcase. Nothing against indie games, mind you, and I saw plenty of cool games there at the show, but there was no big announcement for the PC platform. Gabe Newell did pop up for a quick second to talk about Steam Next Fest, but nothing else. Dying Light 2 did briefly show up, but nothing truly new was shown. It was mostly just the dev talking about some stuff. The skits with the dev bot I found woefully unfunny and took up a significant amount of time, as well as the MechWarrior 5 PC giveaway, which I didn't care about. It wasn't an offensively bad show. It was just a very flat show. Nothing really stood out. Nothing really took me aback. but there were a lot of showcases and some of the stuff looked cool. Future Games Show is basically a sequel to PC gaming shows, what it felt like. Some of the announcements were connected between the two shows, and it was also mostly indie showcases, some of which admittedly once again looked cool. I did think it was better paced than PC gaming show, less time wasted on distracting skits, but ultimately this show also didn't feature anything that made this show particularly memorable. The one more thing at the end was this narrative-driven game called Immortality, created by Sam Barlow, who made Her Story, which is this interactive movie, basically. I imagine Immortality is in the same vein, which is fine. It's also got writers from shows like Queen's Gambit and Mr. Robot, which is also cool, but they only showed a small teaser, and this isn't necessarily the type of game or reveal that will make for a memorable one more thing. So, much like with PC Gaming Show, Future Games Show was alright. Not offensively bad, but not memorable either. Then I'd like to talk about Square Enix, which at the very least did have two major announcements. The first one being Guardians of the Galaxy, the second one being Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is how they opened, which is a brand new game. We haven't seen it before, and I do appreciate that alongside a new trailer, they actually showed a chunky amount of gameplay, but myself and many people aren't yet fully sold on the game. There are aspects of the gameplay and visuals that weren't all there for me, but it does show a lot of potential. I do appreciate that it is a single-player, narrative-driven experience, not a live service like Marvel's Avengers, which makes me more hopeful. But at the end of it all, I'll actually have to get my hands on the game to make a better determination. Then there is the somewhat insulting reveal of Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster, a collection of Final Fantasy 1 through 6, which sounds amazing, except that it's only coming to Steam and mobile and not on consoles, which is just incredibly tone-deaf. Baffled a lot of people. Then an update on Marvel's Avengers and the upcoming Black Panther expansion. Hard to get excited about anything as far as that game goes, so I just kind of tuned out. Then they showed a bunch of snippets for mobile stuff here and there in a row. At least that went by fairly quickly. Babylon's Fall, I was hoping it would impress me because it's being co-developed with Platinum, and I love that studio. They make some awesome action games, but I wasn't super impressed by the footage, and when they announced that it was a live service, I lost a lot of trust towards this game. Square Enix does not have a good track record with live services. I imagine combat's probably going to be decent because it is Platinum, but everything else just left a lot to be desired, and the fact that it is a live service makes me less optimistic for it. And then the showcase concluded with the rather infamous chaos-laden trailer of Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, which is this game being developed by Team Ninja and Koei Tecmo, same team behind Nioh, but Tetsuya Nomura is also involved. This game very much repurposes familiar elements of Nioh while adding some Final Fantasy elements in the mix as well. The trailer, unfortunately, was not a good trailer. The dialogue had the subtlety of a shotgun with its barrages of chaos, 8 chaoses in the span of 2 minutes and 30 seconds. It didn't really do a good job of highlighting its gameplay elements. The graphics looked dated because this is an early demo. Character designs, a lot of fans found to be uninspired. Though I do appreciate that they did release a demo for people to try out the game in its early stage and leave feedback, which is what Nioh 1 did, which makes me more optimistic that the final game really will be a substantial improvement, but the demo itself launched corrupted and unplayable, which made optics worse, and when people finally could dive into the game, feedback overall was mixed. It's in a very rough state. Visually, gameplay-wise, just sound design, everything just feels very much incomplete. There's definitely a lot of room for refinement. It does have some interesting ideas going for it, but there's just a lot of work left to do. I hope they succeed on this. A lot of people do seem to think it shows some potential as long as they enhance what needs to be enhanced by launch. But yeah, this was Square Enix's big finale, and unfortunately, it didn't have the intended effect. It did not stick the landing, and then the absence of titles like Final Fantasy 16 and Forspoken, among others, was something that left people a bit disappointed. And overall, this showcase had nothing that people were unanimously pumped about. There are some folks who are looking forward to seeing more of Guardians and Stranger of Paradise, but I wouldn't say any one of those showcases blew our minds, but they showed enough new stuff and they showed enough gameplay to somewhat justify an E3 slot. But this is certainly not Square Enix's strongest showing, not even close. As for Ubisoft's Forward event, They opened with Rainbow Six Extraction. They gave us a gameplay overview, which was good. They actually showed some gameplay, and they highlighted what is essentially a more tactical style of zombie shooter. It looks somewhat intriguing to me personally, as someone who likes to play tactical games. I do think they spent way too much time showing off Rocksmith Plus, and fans of the 2014 Rocksmith aren't amused with the new subscription model and just how little Rocksmith seems to have evolved and expanded in the last few years. Riders Republic gameplay was shown. Looks alright, like a next iteration of Steep, an open-world sports game that I personally don't have much interest in, but fans of sports games might find some value in it. Then there was some Just Dance stuff, some updates on Valhalla, and then Ubisoft promoted some of their upcoming shows and movies, which I didn't care about for this press conference. The Far Cry 6 showcase that followed I thought was disappointing. They only showed an in-game cutscene, no new gameplay, though there was that trailer for the playable villains from Far Cry 3, 4, and 5. That was a pleasant surprise. I'll give them props for that. This was then followed by the reveal trailer of the sequel to Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle called Sparks of Hope. I actually enjoyed that. And finally, there was the big showstopper, the big finale for Ubisoft, was the new Avatar game being developed by Massive. It was just in-game cinematics, so not a whole lot to glean at as far as how this game will play. I'm not super interested in the Avatar universe personally, but this was still a surprise and unexpected announcement, and at the very least, I am curious to see how it turns out. I just hope it isn't just the same familiar Ubisoft open-world structure with Avatar skin layered on top of it. I really do hope this game feels more unique than Ubisoft's usual outings. So overall, Ubisoft didn't have the worst of E3 21 showcases, but also certainly not the best. The middle in particular felt very padded out and didn't have a whole lot of substance, but they did show some new things, made a few new announcements. The big Avatar game reveal did leave people optimistically curious, so there was some stuff to stick around for at least. Finally, for the mid-tier press conferences, we have Devolver Digital. So, Devolver Digital E3 press conferences are always half showcase and half entertainment. They do lean heavily into skits, but their skits are so ludicrously absurd and over the top that they actually do end up being entertaining in a what the fuck is happening kind of way. This year's skits I felt weren't as good as years past, but they still got a few chuckles and laughs out of me. And as far as games go, they were essentially just indie games published by Devolver Digital. And I've got to say, a lot of the stuff that they showed does look interesting. Shadow Warrior 3 looks genuinely awesome. It's this Doom-like game with fast-paced first-person shooter combat that has you zip around with a hook shot, and the Asian motifs, the enemy designs, the way you combine guns with your katana, and the action just looks frenetic and insane. I love the visuals. Everything about this game really speaks to me personally. Trek to Yomi is this 2.5D side-scroller, black and white, Ghost of Tsushima style looking game. Phantom Abyss is this parkour obstacle course runner that involves navigating trapped-filled ancient dungeons and ruins. Wizard with a Gun is an isometric shoot-'em-up with guns and magic and a cool art style. Death's Door is this isometric action-adventure game which has some really neat-looking combat, and I love the aesthetic of it. It's somewhat Tim Burton-esque, a bit whimsical, but also kind of violent. Inscription is this fascinating looking title that blends deck building, roguelike elements, escape room puzzles with horror. So no big showstoppers, no one last thing moment, still no Hotline Miami 3, but overall an entertaining showcase that was helped by the skits being so outlandish that didn't overstay its welcome and showed a number of interesting and unique looking games. But I wouldn't say this was a high-tier press conference. For the high-tier press conferences, I think most will agree that the top three are Summer Game Fest, Xbox Plus Bethesda, and Nintendo. So let me start by sharing my thoughts about Summer Game Fest. So they opened with the reveal of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, which is this Borderlands spin-off that takes place in a fantasy setting in Tiny Tina's mind, I believe. It takes the Borderlands looter formula, drops you in a fantasy setting, and adds magic spells on top of that you can utilize. No gameplay, unfortunately, but the trailer did give us an idea for the visual direction and some of the gameplay elements we can expect, and I feel like it could be really cool. Then Kojima showed up out of nowhere, shared a trailer for the director's cut of Death Stranding, which adds apparently some new stealth mission types, indoor stealth missions, and new content across the board, I would assume. Tons of references to Metal Gear in that trailer, which some are interpreting as Kojima shelving away Metal Gear, passing it on, and then moving on. Others are saying that maybe this is hinting that he is involved in some kind of Metal Gear project, as some rumors are suggesting. Either way, an unexpected appearance, and I'd say an entertaining bit overall. Jeff Goldblum then came on to unveil the CGI teaser of Jurassic Park Evolution 2, which fans of the original are pleased by, though no gameplay, and they show this trailer like 2 more times in other press conferences. From there, the middle portion of the showcase was a bit more low-key and just kind of cruised by. It showed off updates on existing AAA games as well as various upcoming indie titles, and some of the standouts that I saw include Sable, which had a pretty cool art style, Solar Ash, which is this navigation-focused Shadow of Colossus type of experience, Plane of Lana, this action platformer with watercolor painting aesthetics that really caught my attention. Back 4 Blood looks like a lot of fun, spiritual successor to Left 4 Dead. Evil Dead is a third-person zombie shooter which also looks really cool and has some cool-looking gunplay and melee, and most important of all, family is coming to Rocket League. Obviously, the showstopper. Joking aside, what really made this specific showcase was the big bombshell at the end, the unveiling, finally, the unveiling of Elden Ring's gameplay trailer. The art direction looks utterly incredible. The new gameplay elements you can glean at look great while retaining the familiarity of Soulsborne. Some of the enemy designs and boss encounters look insane. Just a great glimpse of what's to come, a glimpse that we waited years for. So with all said and done, Summer Game Fest I felt was a pretty solid showcase with enough content and surprises and that big one more thing at the end to justify its existence. And while it's, I guess, technically not a part of E3 because Jeff Keighley is distancing himself from E3 and doing his own thing with Summer Game Fest, in that E3 period, Summer Game Fest was clearly among the stronger showcases. Another high-tier press conference was Nintendo Direct, and while I wouldn't say this was Nintendo's best Direct or anything like that, it still had some great announcements. The Kazuya Mishima reveal for Smash Bros. Was comically dark, and his moves and even some of his combos are straight from Tekken and really well implemented into the game, and I just really enjoy that reveal. Metroid Dread is huge for fans of Metroid. The first truly brand new 2D or 2.5D side-scrolling Metroid in 19 years, finally a sequel to Metroid Fusion. And also Dread was actually planned for a Nintendo DS release 15 years ago, and stuff happened. They had to scrap it for a while, and then it finally bore fruit on the Nintendo Switch, which is fantastic. And I saw some gameplay of it at the Treehouse event, and it looks very fluid. It's got that compelling Metroid formula, and it looks incredibly promising. I was also happy to see a new WarioWare get announced. I personally enjoy that wacky series, so I'm glad it's getting a new entry. Shin Megami Tensei 5 showed off a gameplay trailer and actual gameplay during the post-show Treehouse, and it also looks really good, especially, a major step up from Shin Megami Tensei 4 from a visual standpoint, seeing all the demons fully realized to scale as 3D models on the map and during battles. I think that looked really cool. The battle system still retains that rewarding yet punishing aspect to it. They showed a bit more of Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope. The remakes for Advance Wars 1 and 2 was the first time the series has been acknowledged in a while, and hopefully it means we'll see more entries for that. And then there was some other more low-key stuff like a new Mario Party announcement, Mario Golf, Super Monkey Ball Collection, a port of the Danganronpa trilogy, a Fatal Frame remastered port, and more. The finale was basically a Zelda extravaganza. Aonuma came on stage and kept dangling that Breath of the Wild 2 carrot in front of us. He basically did like 3 one more things in a row before he finally showed Breath of the Wild 2, and I thought the wait was worth it in terms of this specific footage and this specific press conference. They showed just enough footage to reveal some new elements like the Sky World, some of the new tools and abilities Link will have at his disposal. It all just looked really great, and there's certainly a lot to analyze there. Unfortunately, there were some notable absences like Bayonetta 3, Splatoon 3, Pokemon Legends, and I'd say Metroid Prime 4, but we got a new Metroid announcement, a new 2D Metroid announcement, so that makes up for that. All in all, though, they showed enough exciting things for Nintendo fans especially that I'd say this was a pretty solid showcase with some show-stopping moments. Further aided by Treehouse, the post-show stream showing tons of gameplay for some of these games. Last but not least, for the high-tier press conferences for this year's E3, there's Xbox plus Bethesda. They kicked things off with a brand new Starfield trailer, which gave us a glimpse of the universe, a glimpse of the graphics generated by the Creation Engine 2, but I wouldn't say it was a super exciting trailer. Still waiting to see more before I get excited, but it's still nice to finally get a first in-engine glimpse of it. This was then followed by Stalker 2, which looks freaking fantastic from the footage I've seen so far. I played Stalker when I was younger and had just a really memorable time with that series, and this is looking like it could be a worthy sequel. The new Battlefield 2042 gameplay actually looked pretty good, I thought. It looks really fun with all of the environmental hazards like tornadoes and all of the aerial mobility. I'm still holding out because EA may find a way to ruin this game's potential, but my interest has certainly been piqued. Psychonauts 2 looks like it has a lot of potential to be a worthy, long-awaited sequel. It's the kind of game that just oozes with unique creativity. And then came Halo Infinite, which is obviously the big one for Microsoft, especially this year when the game comes out. I do wish they would have shown a bit more of campaign stuff. They only really showed an in-game cinematic, no gameplay of the campaign, though we did see plenty of gameplay footage of the new multiplayer, and let's just say I'm very glad that they delayed and took that extra year. The game, I think, is starting to look better and better. The graphics do look improved, and the gameplay looks like a lot of fun, a blend of classic Halo gameplay with some new elements, and it looks like things are starting to come together, and hopefully they manage to make this a successful launch. The sequel to Plague Tale, Requiem, was announced, which has a substantial fandom surrounding it, and those fans are certainly pretty hyped for a new entry. There was a gameplay trailer for Far Cry 6, and it was more than what Ubisoft showed at their press conference. And then came one of the games that has me most excited right now, an indie title called Replaced. This Cyberpunk 2.5D action-adventure side-scroller that combines 3D graphics with pixelated textures and models. The atmosphere looks incredible. I don't know how the gameplay feels, but it looks really fluid. The combat animations look really impressive, and you combine that with the cyberpunk atmosphere that this game establishes, and I think we're looking at a potential winner, and I'm rooting for this game 100%. It was great to see Outer Worlds 2 get announced, and while they only put out a CG trailer, that CG trailer made fun of the trend of releasing CG trailers, and I thought it was very entertaining and very in line with the comedic tone of Outer Worlds as a franchise.
Wet because the developers haven't finished the design, or finished the story, or finished any gameplay that's actually ready to show. In fact, the only thing they have finished is the title.
There was then an extensive showcase of Forza Horizon 5. I personally don't play too many racing games, but fans of this series and of racing games, no doubt, will be excited for it. It visually did look very good. Finally, for the big showstopper, the one last thing for this event was a CGI trailer for a new game called Redfall. It's this zombie shooter-looking game that also mixes in hero shooter vibes, but with vampires instead of zombies. I think that concluding the event with a CGI trailer that gives us no idea about the gameplay did hurt the landing for this press conference a bit, but this is a game coming from Arcane Austin, who are behind Dishonored and Prey, so it does make me optimistic for this game, but it's hard to be genuinely invested in this game when I know nothing about it, when all they show is a pre-rendered trailer that isn't truly indicative of what the gameplay will be. And these are just the highlights, by the way. A few other games that they showed in between include Sea of Thieves, now adding Jack Sparrow and a new storyline. 12 Minutes, I'm still deeply intrigued by. There's Slime Rancher 2, which a good amount of people were happy about. Atomic Heart looks kind of crazy. Yuden Chronicle is a spiritual successor to Suikoden from some of the same devs. Age of Empires 4 was shown a bit, a sequel to this classic real-time strategy franchise. Flight Simulator is now coming to Xbox, and there were even more announcements that I haven't touched on. Xbox definitely had the most to show, and a lot of what they showed did catch my interest, and the fact that the vast majority of what they showed is coming to Game Pass, a lot of it on day one, that's a huge added plus. So with all that out of the way, who won E3? Well, obviously that's going to largely depend on personal preference. I do think that the Summer Game Fest, Nintendo Direct, and the Xbox plus Bethesda Showcase, those three are interchangeable depending on what franchises you're most invested in. For me, the most impactful unveilings were the Elden Ring trailer and the new Breath of the Wild 2 trailer. But I'd say that the showcase that felt most well-rounded was Xbox plus Bethesda, and it did a good job of proving that Xbox won't be starving for games this generation once things get rolling, though whether the quality of those releases end up living up to expectations, well, we'll determine that when they launch. But still, the lineup that they showcase and how much of that is coming to Game Pass and some of those Xbox exclusives, a very promising lineup all around. But even the best of this year's E3 didn't match up to some of the best moments from past E3s. Again, this entire E3, this year's E3 2021, it was definitely one of the least exciting ones in recent memory, but it is important to be understanding of the disruption that the games industry experienced throughout 2020 and the fact that developers are still pushing on and putting out stuff in the midst of these circumstances is worth commending. But that did result in a lot of companies having to hold back and basically scramble for stuff to show in press conferences that felt forced and not entirely justified for a lot of them. Some of the least substantial press conferences in particular, they could have made those announcements via tweets and trailer uploads. A lot of companies essentially hosted mini directs instead of full-on press conferences, press conference scale showcases. So the hope is that as the world starts to return to more normal, we'll see 2022's summer gaming announcements be more substantial and that we'll get just a more exciting summer of showcases. Though who knows, maybe this format isn't meant to be ultimately and eventually will shift towards companies hosting their separate live streams and whatnot. Like Sony, they have entirely departed from E3. They're doing their own state of play down the line. Nintendo does directs throughout the year. Maybe that's going to be the new normal in the not-so-distant future. But we'll see, I suppose. Until then, though, this concludes my overview of the best and worst of E3 2021 for me personally. Now, let me know in the comments below what your take is on E3, how you would rank the various showcases and press conference, how you felt about E3 overall this year, what were your favorite announcements, and what were your least favorite moments. Share all of your thoughts and opinions in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.